In the hush of a distant time, when the mists rolled over rice fields and cherry blossoms bloomed in silence, there was a land shaped by nature, spirit, and story. This land was Japan. A string of islands tucked against the vast Pacific Ocean. Ancient Japan was a world unto itself, serene, mysterious, and steeped in tradition. Its valleys cradled still waters, its forests whispered with the wisdom of the kami, spirits said to dwell in every tree, rock, and stream, and its people lived with deep respect for balance and harmony, a rhythm that echoed through every part of life. But behind the peace, a quiet power was forming, one that would shape the very soul of Japan for centuries to come. It was the way of the warrior, the way of the samurai. Tonight, let us drift back to the very beginning. Long before the rise of armored warriors and towering castles, Japan was governed by clans. These were ancient family groups, some noble, some modest, bound by ancestry and tradition. At the center of them all was the Yamato court, an imperial dynasty that still, even today, holds the world's oldest continuing monarchy. But power was never so simple. Even as the emperor reigned in name, real strength belonged to the clans. And among them were those who began to take up arms, not for conquest, but for protection. Their duty was to guard the land, their leaders, and the codes of honor they held dear. These early fighters were the ancestors of the samurai. They were not yet the noble class of legend, but their discipline, their skill, and their loyalty set them apart. As Japan's political structure shifted like the winds over a quiet pond, these warriors grew in number and in influence. Their rise was slow, quiet, and relentless, like a tide that gently swells until it changes the shape of the shore. Feudal Japan was not born from stillness, but from struggle. As the imperial court's grip loosened, regional clans and powerful families began to compete for control. Land meant wealth, loyalty meant power, and battles became common across the provinces. From this unrest emerged a new class of warriors. Unlike the tribal fighters of old, these men were trained in combat, philosophy, and governance. They lived by strict codes of conduct, often drawn from both Buddhism and Confucian teachings. Their lives were not only about war, they were about balance, of thought, action, and honor. This was the beginning of the samurai, the one who serves. They pledged themselves to their lords, or daimyo, and swore fealty unto death. But they also practiced poetry, studied calligraphy, meditated under waterfalls, and learned to still their hearts before battle. This blend of steel and silence became their mark, and in time, they would become the very face of Japan. As you drift deeper into stillness, imagine a samurai sitting beneath a maple tree in early autumn. The red leaves fall softly around him. His sword rests on his knees, unsheathed but unused. His eyes are closed, not in sleep but in thought. This image was no fantasy. Zen Buddhism, which arrived in Japan from China during the Kamakura period, shaped the samurai profoundly. Zen taught simplicity, discipline, focus, to train the mind as one trains the sword. The samurai practiced zazen, sitting meditation. They learned to silence fear, to calm emotion, to master the self before mastering others. In their gardens, they raked sand into gentle waves and placed stones in deliberate stillness. Their homes were built from wood and paper, open to the flow of nature. And their armor, while made for battle, was crafted with care, designed to move as elegantly as the man within. Even in warfare there was beauty. Even in duty there was peace. By the 10th century, the title of samurai had begun to hold great meaning. It was no longer merely a fighter. It was a status, a path, a life. The Bushi, as they were also known, did not fight for personal gain. They fought for loyalty, for duty, and above all, for honor. They trained in the martial arts, not only swordsmanship but archery, horseback riding, and later, firearms. They wore their hair in distinctive topknots and dressed in layered garments of silk and armor plates. But beneath the surface, their most important weapon was discipline. A samurai who failed his duty might perform seppuku, a ritual suicide meant to preserve his honor even in death. It was not taken lightly. It was a final act of devotion and of unshakable principle. Such extremes may feel distant to us now, but in the world of feudal Japan, they were a reflection of a deeper truth, that the self was not as important as the whole, that to live rightly was more precious than to live comfortably, and that every moment, even the final one, could be a work of art. Before the age of the great shogunates, Japan was a land in transition. The samurai had risen, but they were not yet rulers. The emperor still held the divine seat, though his influence was waning. In the countryside, peasants planted rice and fished the shores. In towns, merchants and craftsmen shaped goods with quiet hands. And in the mountains, monks tended temples as bells rang out across the mist. It was a nation on the edge of change, and into this world would step one of history's most powerful figures, the Shogun. But that is a story for the next chapter. For now, let your thoughts settle like the petals of a cherry blossom drifting down upon a calm stream. Let the whisper of the past guide you into rest. The samurai have taken their place. The land is ready, and the night is still. Sleep gently now. Tomorrow, we walk the path of the Shogun. For the samurai, it was a lesson. The path of the warrior was not only about strength, but about awareness, about selflessness, about grace and death and the space between. This path had a name, Bushidō, the way of the warrior. In this chapter, we walk that path together, softly. The word Bushidō is written with 3 characters. Bu, meaning warrior, shi, meaning gentleman, and do, meaning way or path. It was not a law written by rulers. It was a code of conduct, a philosophy, a spiritual guide. For the samurai, Bushido was not enforced. It was lived. Its principles varied slightly from time to time, but always held to 7 core virtues: gi, righteousness; yu, courage; jin, benevolence; rei, respect; makoto, honesty; meio, honor; and chugi, loyalty. To follow Bushido meant to live a life of deep integrity, a life that valued right action over personal gain, calm in conflict, mercy when possible, precision when necessary. Imagine a samurai at dawn. He stands in a quiet courtyard, his katana resting beside him. But he is not in battle. He is in meditation. The practice of seiza, sitting on the knees in silence, was common. Breathing slow, eyes closed, spirit focused. This inner strength was as crucial as physical training. In fact, a samurai who could not master himself was considered unworthy of mastering others. Many samurai embraced Zen Buddhism, which taught them to let go of attachments, to see life as fleeting, like the morning mist. They understood impermanence, and this allowed them to live boldly, without fear. Death, to them, was not to be avoided, but accepted. Not rushed into, but faced with clarity. The sword of a samurai was no ordinary blade. It was called the katana, a weapon of elegant curvature and unparalleled craftsmanship. But more than a weapon, it was a symbol of the warrior's soul. Forged in fire and folded countless times, a katana was both strong and sharp, but also flexible, like the samurai himself. To draw the sword meant seriousness. There was no casual violence. A true samurai might never strike, but always be ready. For a sword drawn in anger could dishonor not only the samurai, but his family, his lord, and the way of Bushido itself. Swordsmanship, or kenjutsu, was practiced not just as a technique, but as a philosophy. Every move had intention. Every duel was a test of spirit. Even as peace settled over Japan during some eras, samurai would train daily, slicing bamboo poles, perfecting their draw, refining their posture. They sought not victory, but harmony between body and mind. At the heart of Bushido lay one core truth: a samurai serves. Loyalty was not just expected, it was sacred. A samurai pledged himself to a daimyo, a feudal lord, and would defend him even to death. To fail in that duty was a wound not to the body, but to the soul. If a samurai lost his master, he became ronin, a wave man, a warrior with no port, no home, no purpose. To avoid dishonor, a samurai who failed gravely might commit seppuku, a ritual act of self-ending meant to restore dignity through personal sacrifice. This, while tragic to modern ears, was not viewed as failure. It was the ultimate proof of honor, of placing one's name and virtue above one's life. But it was not common, nor was it glorified. It was respected and feared. Most samurai sought to live in a way that made such final acts unnecessary, through devotion, through compassion, through skill. To be a samurai was to be more than a soldier. It was to be a man, or sometimes a woman, of refinement. Their homes were spare, tatami mats, sliding doors, paper windows. Simplicity was a sign of strength, not lack. Beauty was found not in luxury, but in restraint. This aesthetic, called wabi-sabi, cherished imperfection. A cracked teacup, a weathered scroll, a leaf falling out of season. Even decay was beautiful, because it was real. In long eras of peace, such as the Edo period, the need for battlefield warriors decreased, but the samurai remained. They became bureaucrats, teachers, writers, and advisors. They helped govern the land with fairness and order. They passed down stories and values, and they continued to train, not for war, but for the perfection of self. Many began to write manuals and reflections on Bushidō. One of the most famous, Hagakure, was written by Yamamoto Tsunetomo in the early 18th century. It spoke of death not as a tragedy, but as a mirror to life, reminding the samurai to live each day as though it might be their last. Others, like Miyamoto Musashi, blended swordsmanship with philosophy. Musashi wrote The Book of Five Rings, a treatise on combat and mindset that remains studied even in modern times, not only by martial artists, but by business leaders and scholars alike. Bushidō, by then, had become more than a warrior's code. It was a guide for life, a quiet strength, a moral compass. And now, as our chapter draws to a close, let us return to the image of the samurai at dawn, standing beneath the open sky, listening to the world awaken. His sword is sheathed. His heart is still. His duty, eternal. Bushidō was never about war. It was about dignity, about living in such a way that each moment had meaning, each action, purpose, each silence, depth. The samurai were not perfect. They were human, but they aimed higher, not for glory, but for balance. As you drift into sleep, let this ancient path wrap around your thoughts like a silk robe in the night wind. You need not carry a sword to follow the way of Bushidō. Only courage, only calm,